What kind of husband turns his wedding vows into a death sentence for his wife? This is the disturbing story of Timothy Shaun Stemple, a man who planned one of the most cold-blooded murders in Oklahoma's history, all for money. On the surface, Timothy Stemple looked like the perfect family man, a husband, a father, a respected member of the community. But behind that facade, he was living a double life, having an affair with a teenage girl named Terry Hunt. Together, they conspired to get rid of the one person standing in their way, his wife Trisha. On October 24, 1996, the plan was set into motion. Trisha thought she was going out for a drive. Instead, she walked into a nightmare. Timothy beat her savagely with a baseball bat, striking her in the head again and again. Then, to make sure she would never survive, Hunt drove a pickup truck over her body multiple times, crushing her bones and leaving a trail of brutality that investigators would later call almost unimaginable. Why for a $950,000 insurance payout? To Timothy, his wife wasn't a partner or the mother of his child. She was a paycheck. The autopsy revealed a horror story: a fractured skull, broken ribs, shattered bones, and over 170 separate injuries. Prosecutors described the killing as calculated, remorseless, and one of the most heinous crimes they had ever seen. In 1990, Timothy Stemple was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. Hunt, his teenage mistress, was sentenced to life in prison. For years, Stemple maintained his innocence even as appeals were denied. But in March 2012, the state of Oklahoma carried out the sentence. His last meal was pizza and fries. His last words, he insisted he was innocent. This is more than just a murder. It's a chilling reminder of how greed can twist love into betrayal and turn a husband into a killer. Classification: murderer characteristics. Parricide: to collect on a $950,000 insurance policy. Number of victims. 1 date of murder: October 24, 1990. Date of birth: April 9, 1965. Victim profile: his wife Trisha Stemple, 30. Method of murder: beating with a baseball bat and running over her with a pickup. Location: Tulsa County, Oklahoma, USA. Status: executed by lethal injection in Oklahoma on March 15, 2012, March 16, 2012. An Oklahoma man convicted of killing his wife with help from a relative of his mistress to collect insurance money was put to death by injection Thursday. Timothy Shaun Stemple shook his head no when asked if he had any last words, as members of his family and his wife's sat separately from each other watching the condemned man through glass. The 46-year-old Stemple gasped for about 20 seconds, his eyes opened, and he groaned. He then laid still with closed eyes and his face turned pale. He was pronounced dead at 6:11 p.m. His family had asked the governor to stay the execution so that medical testimony disputing his accomplice's account of the 1996 attack on Trisha Stemple could be heard in court. Stemple's mother, his 21-year-old daughter, and his sisters held each other by their hands and arms as he was being put to death. One of his sisters held his crying daughter's face close to hers. Afterward, Trisha Stemple's sister, Deborah Ruddick Bird, said the day was not about Timothy Stemple. She said, "It was about justice, finality, and closure for my gorgeous sister Trisha and my family. Today we put a period at the end of the chapter that held us captive for far too long," Ruddick Bird told reporters. "Today we breathe again. Today we move forward and move on." Trisha Stemple, 30, was beaten with a plastic-covered baseball bat and run over by a pickup truck October 24, 1996 along a Tulsa highway. Her husband maintained his innocence throughout the trial and appeals process. And at a clemency hearing last month, he declined to address pardon and parole board members. The board denied his plea for clemency. The state of Oklahoma murdered an innocent man today, his mother, Leah Stemple, told the Associated Press by phone after the execution. "I don't want vengeance, but I want the truth to be known so this doesn't happen to another family. My son was a noble man." The New York-based Innocence Project also urged Governor Mary Fallin to stay the execution and called for additional DNA testing to be done. Human blood was found on the plastic that was on the bat, but it was too deteriorated to determine whose it was, prosecutors said. His family hoped advances in DNA testing could help exonerate him. Stemple's execution at the state prison in McAlester is the first of 3 scheduled over the next 2 months in Oklahoma. Last month, Department of Corrections officials said the state has 4 doses left of the lethal injection drug pentobarbital, an anesthetic that manufacturers have objected to selling for use in executions. It was among the drugs used to execute Stemple. Stemple's accomplice Terry Hunt told the AP during a prison interview Sunday that he was disappointed Stemple didn't confess when given the opportunity at the clemency hearing. "I'm not innocent and Shaun is not innocent," said Hunt, who's in prison in Hominy serving a life sentence. Hunt is the cousin of Danny Wood, who was having an affair with Timothy Stemple. Hunt's testimony that the crime was brutal, with Trisha Stemple being conscious during much of the attack, was a factor that helped prosecutors secure the death penalty for Stemple. Hunt struck the woman with a bat twice, and her husband hit her in the back of the head about 20 to 30 times, according to Hunt's testimony. Hunt said Stemple tried to drive over his wife's head with the pickup truck. Hunt tried to place a wheel on her chest. Following the initial attack, she managed to drag herself onto grass along the highway after they drove away. In his testimony, Hunt said they returned and struck her with the truck traveling about 60 mph. A forensic expert consulted by Timothy Stemple's family said the wife's injuries were consistent with being hit by a vehicle and run over, but that there's no evidence she was beaten. The medical examiner first thought she died after being hit by a car, but there was no primary point of impact below the knees, as is usual in the typical auto-pedestrian collision, according to prosecutors' report in the case. March 15, 2012. McAllister, Oklahoma executed Timothy Shaun Stemple on Thursday evening for the 1996 murder of his wife, Trisha Stemple. He was pronounced dead at 6:11 p.m. at Oklahoma State Penitentiary. He had declined to offer any last words and took a few short gasps and briefly opened his eyes after the lethal injection began at 6:05 p.m. His daughter, Lauren Stemple, witnessed the execution along with Stemple's parents and two sisters. She sobbed quietly on her aunt's shoulder as her father took his final breaths. A last-minute campaign this week by Shaun Stemple's family and anti-death penalty groups failed to convince Governor Mary Fallin to grant Stemple a stay of execution. In 1997, a jury convicted Stemple of brutally beating to death his wife of 11 years and running over her with a pickup, aided by a teenage accomplice. Investigators said he planned his wife's killing to collect on a $950,000 insurance policy. Several of Trisha Stemple's family members also witnessed the execution, along with retired Tulsa homicide detective Mike Huff and Tulsa County Sheriff Stanley Glantz. Trisha Stemple's youngest sister, Deborah Ruddick-Bird, offered a statement on behalf of her family after the execution. "Today is not about Shaun, it's about justice, finality, and closure for my gorgeous sister Trisha and my family." Thursday, Ruddick-Bird said her family put a period at the end of a chapter that held us captive for far too long. Stemple's final meal request was a large stuffed crust pizza with extra cheese, half pepperoni, and half Canadian bacon, and a 2-liter bottle of orange soda with ice. He was the second Oklahoma inmate to be executed this year. Stemple and his family contended that he was innocent, and that Trisha Stemple died as a result of an automobile pedestrian collision. They mounted a campaign based on their belief that he was wrongly convicted using analysis from forensic firms they hired to bolster their case. The Innocence Project and the Norwegian foreign minister lobbied for Fallin to stay Stemple's execution. According to court testimony, Shaun Stemple hired a teenage accomplice, Terry Hunt, to wait in the woods along US 75 between 81st and 91st Streets, and Stemple, who had his wife with him, feigned car trouble so he could stop at a pre-selected spot nearby. Stemple and Hunt then took turns beating Trisha Stemple with a cellophane-wrapped baseball bat, and he ran over her body with a pickup, evidence indicated. Court records indicate that Trisha Stemple tried to get up after her husband tried to drive the truck's tires over her head, and he got out of the truck, walked over to her, and said, "Don't worry, Trish, the ambulance is on its way." He then grabbed the bat again and hit her in the back of the head 8 to 12 more times, court records indicate. Trisha Stemple's skull, neck bone, and pelvis were crushed and 17 ribs were broken. A hole was drilled into one of Trisha Stemple's car tires to make it appear that she'd had car trouble, according to testimony. Her body was found alongside the highway after Shaun Stemple reported her missing. Trisha Stemple's death was originally investigated as a hit-and-run auto-pedestrian collision, but investigators began to suspect foul play as they examined the evidence. Hunt, the cousin of Shaun Stemple's then-girlfriend, testified for the prosecution and is serving a life sentence for first-degree murder. Attorney General Scott Pruitt issued a statement Thursday before Stemple's execution, reiterating that a jury of Stemple's peers examined the evidence and sentenced him to death 14 years ago. "My thoughts are with Trisha Stemple's family and what they have endured," Pruitt said, March 16, 2012. A man convicted of killing his wife with help from his mistress's relative to collect insurance money was put to death by lethal injection last night. Timothy Shaun Stemple's execution in Oklahoma was carried out at the state prison in McAllister after Gov. Mary Fallin denied a request by the condemned man's family to stay the capital punishment. His family sought to have medical testimony disputing his accomplice's account of the 1996 attack on Trisha Stemple heard in court. Stemple was a married kids soccer coach in 1996 when he had an affair and enlisted his girlfriend's 16-year-old cousin to help him kill his wife of 11 years, according to evidence presented at his 1997 trial. Trisha Stemple, 30, was beaten, run over with a pickup truck, and left on the side of a road beside her car, whose tire was punctured with a drill to make the crime appear to be random carjacking, testimony showed. Timothy Stemple might have collected on a $950,000 life insurance policy, but his teenage accomplice testified against him in exchange for a life prison term, court testimony showed. The 30-year-old woman was beaten with a plastic-covered baseball bat and run over by a pickup truck October 24, 1996 along a Tulsa highway. Her husband maintained his innocence throughout the trial and appeals process. And at a clemency hearing last month, Timothy Stemple, 46, declined to talk about the case, saying it wasn't the appropriate forum. Prison spokesman Jerry Massey told Reuters that Stemple chose pizza as his last meal. The Pardon and Parole Board denied his plea for clemency. Stemple's execution is the first of 3 scheduled over the next 2 months in Oklahoma. Last month, Department of Corrections officials said the state has 4 doses left of the lethal injection drug pentobarbital, an anesthetic that manufacturers have objected to selling for use in executions. Stemple's accomplice Terry Hunt told the Associated Press during a prison interview Sunday that he was disappointed Stemple didn't confess when given the opportunity at the clemency hearing. "I'm not innocent and Shaun is not innocent," said Hunt, who's in prison in Hominy serving a life sentence. Hunt is the cousin of Danny Wood, who was having an affair with Timothy Stemple. Hunt's testimony that the crime was brutal, with Trisha Stemple being conscious during much of the attack, was a factor that helped prosecutors secure the death penalty for Stemple. Hunt struck the woman with a bat twice, and her husband hit her in the back of the head about 20 to 30 times, according to Hunt's testimony. Hunt said Stemple tried to drive over his wife's head with the pickup truck. Hunt tried to place a wheel on her chest. Following the initial attack, she managed to drag herself onto grass along the highway after they drove away. In his testimony, Hunt said they returned and struck her with the truck traveling about 60 mph. A forensic expert consulted by Timothy Stemple's family said the wife's injuries were consistent with being hit by a vehicle and run over, but that there's no evidence she was beaten. The medical examiner first thought she died after being hit by a car, but there was no primary point of impact below the knees, as is usual in the typical auto-pedestrian collision, prosecutors said in a report in the case. And that was the shocking case of Timothy Shaun Stemple, a husband who chose greed over love and turned marriage into murder. It's a haunting reminder that sometimes the most dangerous betrayals come from the people closest to us. If this story kept you watching, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more chilling true crime cases. Because behind every crime there's a motive, and behind every motive a deadly truth.